Do you have the vengeance of a god in your heart, or just the need to be a social warrior for justice? Well, you're going to learn about how to be a paladin and do it right today on WebDM. So classes have resumed. We're back in session.
Back in session with the class shows.
When you think paladin, what do you think? Like, addition aside, like just the concept of that.
So my idea of Paladins formed around the Quest for Glory games by Sierra.
Okay.
And I worked really hard as a kid to play those games and make the choices you need that you can become a Paladin by the end of the second game and then play all through the third one. For me, in my mind, a Paladin's a do-gooder, a champion for justice.
Yeah.
And it's explicitly tied to the lawful good alignment in Dungeons & Dragons because coming out of the Quest for Glory games and this idea of a Paladin as a champion for goodness,
Yeah.
I really glommed onto the Paladin in second edition as that classic knight in shining armor, Arthurian legend come to life, Paladin.
Right.
And I know over the editions and over the years that definitions has expanded, and that the conceptual space for Paladins has grown to fit in non-lawful good alignments.
Yeah. Let's speak to that. The shift over the editions, because I mean, do you have to be lawful good to be a paladin?
I mean, not anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like, and decoupling the paladin sort of suite of abilities from the alignment and instead replacing it with the oaths is, I think, a step in the right direction with 5th edition. Certainly there are paladins of sort of liberation who are more chaotic aligned, or paladins who are less concerned about rigid adherence to law and goodness, more just generally promoting one over the other. So it broadens the conceptual space for what you can do with paladins, while at the same time allowing you to play that classic lawful good, knight in shining armor, sort of champion of goodness and justice that I tend to favor. I find myself in a position where I wish that the classic version of the Paladin still captured people's imaginations, and I wish that it's like, yeah, this is the only Paladin that we need.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm glad that there's room for other people's variations on the Paladin.
It's
not just the one thing.
That you have options.
That you have options, yeah.
So when talking about the paladin, before we get into the mechanics,
Right.
that adherence to an alignment,
Right.
and if you broke from that, there were some stiff penalties.
Yeah, in previous editions, it was really, Paladins were really restricted in that.
Right.
So there were always those.
So now that you don't have that and you just have an oath, as a DM, how rigid would you be? And I'm mostly referring to what happened in the Razzle Sin game in the woods.
Right. So I mean,
like seriously, what do you think the repercussions for that? Not metagaming either, trying to get info.
Right. So I think, how rigidly you enforce the oaths, first off, if you're going to be playing a paladin, then really take those oaths as your guidelines for role playing.
Right.
And so, I would ask a player of a paladin to make sure they know what the oaths are and what the tenets of each oath is, particularly the one, obviously, that they picked for their class. And to maybe talk to that player about it, like, what does that mean for you? How does that player see those oaths playing out over the course of the game? DM says, well, here's how I interpret them. And that there's a middle ground somewhere between player expectation and DM expectation over what to do with the oath.
Yeah.
That said, once you guys established those, whatever those tenets are going to be, or how you're going to interpret those tenets, hold them to it pretty strongly. So with Emma, and she's playing an Oath of the Crown paladin, and they're more focused on upholding lawfulness and justice in a more neutral setting, or more neutral sense than the classic knight in shining armor type paladin. So slaying someone, murdering someone in the middle of the woods sort of out of expediency is one of those things where it might stretch her oaths, depending on when she kind of gets out of this very stressful situation, or Fabian does at least, and can reflect on what happened and the decisions that led to murdering a peasant woman in the middle of the woods. That's where it comes up.
But the woman did admit to murdering her own husband.
The woman did admit to murdering her own husband, which is why ultimately I think having an interpretation of the paladin that's more lawful focused as opposed to lawful and good or goodness focused allows for that space and says, you know what, She was a murderer, self-confessed murderer. Companion that I'm traveling with, who's sort of deputized by me and from the Paladin's perspective, is acting on that Paladin's authority.
Right.
Then there's no conflict there. It's just it's a different world that Paladins live in now than for previous editions.
Well, they have to live in this world, and they have been given some tools, so let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Right.
What's your one favorite ability that the Paladin gets?
I mean, in terms of, it's hard to pass up Smite, right? Smite is sort of the defining feature. A lot of times, particularly if if you're thinking about the Paladin, how it differs from, say, the Fighter or the Ranger, Smite sort of stands out as the central feature that boosts their damage, gives them those good spikes of damage, whether you're waiting for a crit or you're just adding it to every attack or every other attack and just burning brightly for the encounter, and then having to go back to to having those spells. I like the Smite mechanic because it offers a dilemma for the player.
Right.
Do I cast a spell, of which there's many useful Paladin spells?
There
most of them defensive in nature, but there are useful spells for the Paladin to have, and they're a half caster. They get plenty of spells and can do a lot of things with them. And so, do you trade that for the D8 dice that you're going to get, or do you use that spell slot for something else? Are you a backup healer?
Right.
Are you providing some kind of spell support for the party that you're going to need to keep some spells back? And so,
do you need some radiant damage?
do you need some radiant damage?
Or some fire damage?
Or some fire damage, or you're going to get in a smite. So I find that the smite mechanic offers a real choice for the player, and it's not round to round or encounter to encounter. The player has an option. Do I do this? Do I do that? I'm giving up something in order to do more damage, and it allows you to play a paladin in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. That resource management is quite important. It's the same dilemma with the Order of the Immortal.
Yeah, right. So I mean, like, when do you use your psi points to get the boost from lethal weapon? Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, the Paladin is equipped though with other things other than those spells. I mean, they got their Divine Sense, which it comes in quite useful.
It comes quite useful. I like that it's detecting powerful creatures as opposed to actual alignments. Their aura abilities, granting charisma bonus to saves, is a very powerful ability, and for some groups, the people that play high octane D&D, having that paladin bonus there is going to be essential, because it's really one of the few ways to boost your saves in a way that doesn't, I guess, in a more consistent manner than, say, spells or other sort of abilities. But it also creates its own hazards, because you got to be clumped up around the paladin.
Well, that's the thing. You're prime fodder for a fireball.
Right, you really are. At least up until the levels where that radius extends. So I don't know. The aura of courage. I just find that, or not just aura of courage, but all of the aura abilities. I find that the paladins just have a range of abilities that reinforces their archetype, that work well together. And having played a paladin now up to almost 9th level, having watched people play paladins up to level 16, level 20, we've had a lot of paladins in our games. We can see all the different ways that you can play them, and all the different things that they can do. And in every one of them, they're sort of a central character, both mechanically and just because of the way they've been role played in a thematic sense.
We've gone through some of the abilities here. Let's dip into some specific oaths.
Yeah.
Let's start with Devotion, which currently...
I'm playing my Devotion Paladin in the Curse of Strahd game. It's been a real blast, just in terms of taking that specific character into that setting, and sort of like how would they deal with the realization that the people that live here have had to do horrible, horrible things in order to survive.
Right.
And he can't necessarily hold the people who live in Barovia to the same standards he would back home, because it's like people back home don't live with a vampire as their lord, with hags preying on them and that kind of thing. So it's been a challenge to role play that I've had a lot of fun with. And then there's the fact that the Devotion Paladin is the paladin you want to bring to a fight if it involves undead or fiends. And that's just the case.
It really does, because they can, with your channel divinity, you can. Is that this one where you can make your weapon magical?
You make your weapon magical. You get to add your charisma bonus to hit. It sheds light, and so in that respect, it's really handy that way. If we were playing with feats in that game, I probably wouldn't go sword and board. I might go great weapon, just for the fact that I'm adding my charisma bonus to hit, sort of offsetting the penalty from great weapon master. But because we chose not to go with feats, I went with a more classic sword and board, get stuck in kind of fighter, or warrior type rather.
Yeah.
And I'm impressed with the durability of the Paladin. I'm impressed with the fact that lay on hands, if you use all of your points to sort of recover your own, yourself, you've got a great sort of emergency heal if needed.
Oh, totally.
With plate armor and a shield, things like protection from evil if you're fighting undead, granting that giving them disadvantage to hit you, or just shield of faith, boosting your AC above 20, make for a character that I rarely get hit, and
it's true.
When I do, it's easy to recover from being hit.
Most definitely, yeah. Especially me playing a life cleric.
Right, especially with you playing a life cleric.
We haven't run into a lot of that we couldn't handle.
No.
Anything really.
No.
What are some of the later devotion abilities?
So eventually, they're going to be able to grant sort of like immunity to charms and frightened conditions to other people. They're able to eventually, I believe, grow a set of wings, sort of become an angelic warrior. And most of the capstone abilities for Paladin have this kind of transformative aspect to them, where they become something more than what they are, and their divine spark, as it were, or inspiration, the oath that they took that makes them Paladins, sort of manifests in this physical transformation. And so high-level Paladins, they're gaining a flight speed, they're gaining, defenses that make them tougher, will last longer. And I, we really only have had a chance to see one of those capstones in effect with Emma's other Paladin, Brondel, the Oathbreaker.
Yeah, the Oathbreaker. Well, let's move on over to that.
Right.
Because she had a lot of fun with the Oathbreaker.
She did have a lot of fun with the Oathbreaker, and I think some of that came from just how she decided to portray the character. But from a mechanical perspective, what I liked about it was she was able to play a very mobile, ranged fighter because of that dwarven thrower that she had.
Yeah.
So you can smite with a thrown weapon, and it was just, the ability to throw her axe and have it come back. Really opened up the space for her in terms of what she would do with the Paladin, riding around on its little tarantula.
Yep.
And throwing her axes and hammers at things instead of being a more frontline type of fighter. That and the synergy with having an Oathbreaker and a Necromancer in the same party.
Well,
another thing, getting that damage, having the Necromancer with their boosted undead,
right,
then getting the damage boost from the Oathbreaker ability was just another sort of like cherry on top of the undead pie that you guys had made.
Yeah. So in the, what was it, the first Horde of the Dragon Queen?
Yeah.
Where Audie played Fariel, Oath of the Ancients.
Yeah, so that's the
And
other.
That's the only time we've seen that.
That's the only time we've seen an Oath of the Ancients, and it's the only other high-level Paladin.
Yeah.
I believe that Fariel got up to level 16.
Right.
And by the time we finished that campaign, you guys were fighting like shadow dragons, riding on the back of gold dragons yourself. Like, it was like high fantasy D&D.
Yeah, it's the good stuff.
Right. And so the climactic battle of that campaign, here she is. Here's this sort of high elf Oath of Ancients Paladin riding on the back of a gold dragon, fighting a shadow dragon, and sort of like, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, getting the killing blow on that dragon and sort of ending the particular ritual that was going on at that time.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I look at Oath of Ancients Paladin, I see first of all, a lot of synergy with Archfey Warlocks, and there's a lot there, both thematically that fits really well. And I look at them and I see, okay, this is an interesting take on the Paladin. And I'm not as familiar with sort of the nature-themed fighters that were in 4th edition. I don't know how much is, say, for instance, the Warden or something else that's being ported over from 4th edition, inspiring this particular oath.
Right.
But I like it. I've got a forest gnome Oath of Ancients Paladin that I occasionally break out for one-shots every now and then. That I find he's really fun to play.
Yeah.
If you want that kind of character who's a warrior for the wilderness that's different from the ranger, then an Oath of Ancients Paladin is certainly what I play.
Yeah, most definitely.
And it just, to me, it goes to show you, even the other remaining option in the Player's Handbook, Vengeance, all three of them, they're tightly focused. They've got a great feel to them, and the thematics of the class really fit well with the mechanics of it.
Yeah, going on to that, like Vengeance reminds me from 4th edition, the
Avenger.
The Avenger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's obviously the basis for it.
Right.
And I've wanted to play one. I think if I played a Paladin, it's like
Definitely
I
Vengeance.
want to try that, but Devotion, being able to have a magic weapon is kind of.
It's really, yeah, I mean, being able to give yourself a magic weapon is pretty sweet. But Vengeance, I think, has a lot going for it. And, and to me, it highlights how far you can stretch that Paladin concept.
Right.
An oath-bound warrior who is set against the forces of evil and has vowed to fight them. The devotion comes from, say, a devotion to the gods or devotion to some sort of philosophy. Oath of Ancients comes from ancient pacts in nature and sort of the natural world, the beauty and light in the natural world, whereas Vengeance is like an oath born out of fear and grief and anger, given form, and you can do a lot of things with it, and I like it. As a class, mechanically it's really tight.
Right.
The abilities that you get support the thematics of the class, and I don't know, I just love Paladins. They're great in this edition.
They are quite fun. Yeah. So let's get on to let's talk about the spells a little bit.
Okay.
What are some of your highlights for or things to look out for with spells, like reason? Hey, you don't need to smite all the time.
Right. I always keep, for me personally, I keep at least one spell slot per level open to cast a spell.
Right.
Most everything else is going to be left open for smites if I want. I love protection from good and evil, rather. It offers a lot of good abilities, being able to give yourself disadvantage against monsters that are featured quite heavily, undead and fiends in particular. Is pretty handy. If it's not an undead or a fiend, I'm probably going to use my concentration for a Shield of Faith spell. That's more lower level magic. I'm not as enamored with the smite spells on the Paladins list.
Yeah.
I think branding smite's pretty useful because it can tag an invisible enemy.
That's kind of an important thing.
Right. And I like Searing spell, if only because I do believe that in a D&D type world, the ability to do fire damage on demand is going to be an important feature.
Yeah.
Never mind that there are a lot of things resistant to fire. There are also a lot of things that are vulnerable to fire, and being able to have that in your back pocket. The command spell is pretty interesting. Command flee, the enemy flees, you get your reaction attack in if that's what you're looking for. Those are kind of what I'm looking at for low-level Paladin spells. Higher level, the aura spells can be useful.
Oh yeah.
And really, it's less of what specific spells I'm going to take than just like whether or not I'm going to use that one. Use this slot for a smite as opposed to cast something else. There are some stinker spells though.
Yeah, but that's with any spell list.
Yeah.
There's always those spells that no one ever picks.
That no one ever picks, and I was talking with Emma about this, about her Paladins, because I noticed that she often tries to use something like Compelled Duel or the Oath of Crown Channel Divinity feature to, in a similar manner of a taunt.
Right.
And I find that there's goading attack with the Battle Master fighter, which I don't find, probably would never pick that maneuver. But Paladin is the only class I can really think of that has a taunt type ability, either through a spell or Channel Divinity, that is in the game, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like they're very useful. So I question why they're in the game in the first place, what their purpose is, and why you would ever want to use those abilities as opposed to just hitting.
Or just yelling, come at me, bro.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe those abilities, like the sort of the taunt abilities, are there for the people who like that kind of thing, and they're just watered down. But particularly something like Compelled Duel, where another member of your party can't hurt the creature or attack it without breaking the spell.
Right.
That's clearly a very situational spell that you don't always want to break out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, unless it's one of those things where you want to hold one guy away from the rest of the party while they mop everyone else up. And then they can come in and help you finish them off.
Right.
That could be a way. It's a way to put a tough guy against an enemy in the same way that you would banish an enemy for a while.
Yeah.
While everyone else can
kind of tie up that one enemy with the Paladin. I can see that being useful.
Yeah.
In certain conditions, particularly if you're in like a big group battle and you do want to be able to isolate someone before you get spells like, say, Hold Person or Banishment or something like that. But yeah, I mean, overall, the Paladin spell list has some interesting things on it. Aura of Life is pretty good. Aura of Vitality, I believe, are the two Aura spells. But For the most part, I've noticed in our campaigns that after first or second level spells, most of those slots get used for smites. And third and fourth and fifth level paladin spells rarely get cast because those slots are being used to deliver those fistfuls of D8 that everybody loves.
Yeah, they do love that. They do love dropping the D8s on everyone. When you're trying to put a paladin like in a campaign world, and like, is it a paladin? Is it just a guy who believes in God? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is he just a pious fighter?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you see fitting a paladin into a world as a DM or a player?
As a player, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that what sets a paladin apart from, say, a war domain cleric or a fighter with the acolyte background is that oath,
right,
and a commitment to fighting evil and opposing the forces of evil in the world, however you approach that or however you define that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's sort of what sets them apart. Their oath is what makes them a paladin. In terms of incorporating them into the game world as a whole, you know, let's say you have a religious organization that's very hierarchical, very sort of top-down. There's a high priest or a pope or whatever you want to call them,
right,
a prelate, who, you know, is the mouthpiece of a particular divinity, and then there's a whole hierarchy of priests that come after them. Our paladins sort of like the Templars of that particular religion, and they guard holy sites, they guard pilgrims, they guard priests as they go about their business. Our paladins just, are they born? Do you know, that the divine spark that's in you, and then you swear an oath, and the convergence of these two events, something innate and something that happens to you and something that you do, creates a paladin that's outside of that particular structure. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of good ground to be I don't know, covered. In the tension between the fact that you might have a religious organization that opposes a particular paladin. Ooh. That says, hey, you know, whatever it is that you're doing over here, where you're champion of goodness self, it's going against what we would rather you be doing. And so maybe there's a tension between what the paladin does, because they do it out of a sense of, you know, inner justice, mm-hmm, as opposed to strict adherence to a particular moral code.
Yeah, instead of just dealing with the dogma.
Right, and I think that there's a lot of interesting things to be covered in terms of, you know, who really speaks for the gods in a D&D setting. Is it the cleric? Is it the paladin? Is it just a lowly priest?
Yeah.
You know, what is it? I think it's worth it for DMs to consider the implications of having these classes in their game, and what does it mean? How do they fit in? And that's what sets it apart. I mean, I don't know. You've got classes for a reason. You should incorporate those classes into your campaign.
Yeah. Shouldn't get too, you know, worry too much about the existential ramifications or implications.
Yes.
Is that good? So yeah, if I could get like some Advil or something, because my neck is killing me. Like, I don't know if you noticed that whole time where I just kept like doing this.
Yeah, you're doing a thing with your head.
Because
we're about to take a break.
When I look like this for more than like 30 seconds, my neck just starts tightening up, and I just have to like straight, and then I'm...
Think you can give me an intro really quick, or do you want to come back?
No, because I'll be looking straight ahead. Man, I wish I had the lay on hands ability right now, so we could talk Paladins, because my neck hurts. Are you recording that?